Welcome everyone. My name is Liz Cute, Community Engagement Manager at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, and I'll be playing host today for our webinar. And I just want to go over a few quick housekeeping items before we get started with our presentation. So you're all on mute right now, and you are able to use the chat function if you have any questions. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and I might respond directly in the chat or bring those questions back up during our designated question and answer portions during our presentation. The webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending the recording as well as the slides, which have links to resources to all of our registration guests. So you will have all that information for later. Today's webinar will include the following speakers. We have Emily, our Director of Ecological Programs at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, as well as Erica and Sarah. You can see their titles here on the slide. And we also have Golf Course Superintendent from River Oaks Golf Club, Ricky Johnson, who will be available for some question and answer portions during the webinar. So I will turn it over to I'm going to turn it over to Emily to get started with the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Liz, and thanks to everybody for attending today and for your interest in the webinar. So again, my name's Emily. I'm the Director of Ecological Programs at Waterkeeper. I've been with Waterkeeper for about 8 years and have been managing our Living Shoreline program for the majority of that time. So Waterkeeper recently led a restoration project at River Oaks Golf Course in Grand Island, New York. So our webinar today is going to highlight that project while also talking about the larger context for how the techniques applied through that project can be applied in other similar golf course settings to improve sustainability. Okay, so for today's agenda, I'll be starting with some background on Waterkeeper and our Living Shoreline program and the River Oaks Golf Course project. And then I'll turn it over to Erica, who's gonna dive into the specifics of the River Oaks project as an example for how to select sites and sustainability practices in a golf course setting. And she'll also discuss a spectrum of management strategies for consideration. We'll then pause for a moment for questions at that point, and then Sarah will be talking about reference documents, programs, and funding resources that can be used to advance this work. And then we'll have another chance for questions after that, and then we'll wrap up at that point. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get into the background section of today's workshop, beginning with an overview of Waterkeeper and what we do for anybody who's not familiar with our organization. So we are a community-based nonprofit, and our mission is to protect and restore our valuable water resources while connecting people to our local waterways. Our organization was established about 30 years ago, and we currently have about 25 staff members and over 60 active projects in a variety of program areas, including shoreline cleanups, river tours, land protection, watershed planning, and restoration projects like the one we'll be talking about today. So I just want to give some context for where we work. Our work is focused in the Niagara River watershed, which covers portions of Erie, Niagara, Wyoming, and Genesee counties. And for those attending that are from outside the watershed, just wanted to give some context for where we are located in New York State. So the River Oaks Restoration Project, which we'll be highlighting today, is part of Waterkeeper's Living Shoreline program. So I wanted to give some background on that program and how it came to be. The program was developed in response to the amount of degraded and altered shorelines in our region. So you can see in this map, we completed a desktop analysis on shoreline condition, and we found that over 80% of shorelines on the US side of the upper Niagara River have been hardened. So just a couple photos to show what we often observe in the watershed, which is that on a widespread basis, the uses of land in the watershed are not always compatible with natural ecosystems and the benefits they provide. So often we see that shorelines are mowed to the very edge, which leaves the shorelines exposed to erosion, can cause property loss, and also degrade water quality. We also see a lot of shorelines that have been hardened, like the ones shown in these photos, which erases the natural function of the shoreline entirely. Well, in some cases, the hardened materials along a shoreline may be justified when the vast majority of them exist in this condition, as you saw in the map on the couple slides ago. It does have a cumulative impact on our waterways. So when shorelines exist in a natural form, they provide a lot of great benefits. So when I say natural form, I generally mean a gradual transition between the land and water with a variety of native vegetation extending throughout that riparian zone. So healthy shorelines have thick, dense root systems, and they provide improved water quality by filtering out nutrients and fertilizers before they enter our waterways. And in our region with such valuable freshwater resources, this is important for a lot of reasons, things like recreation, healthy fish populations, and for clean drinking water for those of us who get our drinking water within the watershed. They also reduce flooding by absorbing water much better than turf grass. They protect the shoreline from erosion, preventing property loss, improve access to and from the water for humans and wildlife, and they're also critical for supporting many fish and wildlife populations which rely on these areas for at least a portion of their life cycle. So in order to address the need to restore these critical healthy shoreline habitats in our watershed, the Living Shoreline program was developed in 2012. So through this program, our goal is to restore degraded shorelines to a more natural, functional, and self-sustaining form. And we do this by applying nature-based and green infrastructure principles, really using nature as our inspiration. So in addition to improving ecological conditions, these projects are also really important as demonstration sites to spread the knowledge for how these shoreline resources can be managed in a functional and ecologically friendly manner. Just wanted to show a couple photos of some projects we've implemented to date. So this one's from Grand Island as well. And this one is in a municipal park in Niagara Falls at Hyde Park. So just gonna pause here momentarily for a quick poll question. We'd love to get a sense of who today is attending that's associated with a golf course. If you could take a moment to answer the poll that was just popped up.
We'll give it a couple more seconds in case anybody hasn't participated in the poll. I know we have a few folks on phones, so they won't be able to participate. But it looks like we have a couple, maybe. We also had some other folks that might registered, weren't able to join today, but they will be receiving this information via email. All right. Thank you guys for participating in that.
Awesome. So it looks like we have at least a couple people. So I just wanted to touch here on the benefits of shoreline and sustainability in a golf course landscape specifically. So some of those same benefits that I mentioned before, the ability to provide clean water quality and protect the shoreline from erosion and property loss. They also provide reduced maintenance needs, and they create visual interest to the course. Okay, so before we get into the specifics of this, this project, I just wanted to show this graphic and talk about the larger context for why this work matters. So whether your golf course has a stream or waterway that runs through it, or water features that aren't necessarily connected to a stream, the concept of shoreline restoration is still important, even as even isolated waterways will directly infiltrate into groundwater. So there's a saying that everyone lives downstream, which is important in thinking about how activities on the land affect conditions of the waterway as it continues to flow through the landscape and feed into larger waterways. So in this case, in our watershed, our drinking water comes from either directly from streams or the Niagara River or from groundwater wells. And then the Niagara River flows into Lake Ontario, which provides drinking water for several million people. So it's important to think about this work in the local, regional, and Great Lakes-wide context. Okay, so diving into background on the River Oaks Golf Course specifically, this slide provides some context for the location of the project. So we're looking at a portion of the town of Grand Island where the project is located. You can see the black line is showing Spicer Creek, which flows through the golf course, which is that yellow parcel there, and then it flows into the Niagara River. And the red stars show the specific restoration sites that Erica will be talking about today. Okay, so meetings and conversations about this project first began back in 2016. So the town of Grand Island has a conservation advisory board, and several members of the conservation advisory board were also volunteering as part of Waterkeeper's water quality monitoring program. So they were sampling a site downstream of the course, which really got them interested in the water quality of Spicer Creek there. So they reached out to the golf course superintendent, who was willing to meet with us and do a site visit. And they also invited, I listed the folks here who they invited. So Waterkeeper, reps from the Department of Environmental Conservation, and also the municipality. So here I really wanted to highlight the benefits of having robust partner engagement and support from the beginning of the project, which is really important to the success of any project. So all the partners were critical in advancing the project, and we're really thankful to everybody, and especially River Oaks Golf Course, for their willingness to work with us on this project. Without them, this work really would not have been possible. And it always helps if you have a cute dog. That's Jasper in the photo. And then just wanted to touch on the funding for this project. Oh yeah, actually I skipped over something for this last slide. So during the site visit, we walked the site and we learned about the issues that the course was experiencing, which included a lot of sediment in the portion of the creek they were using for irrigation. They were also having some issues with low water levels and stagnant water. So ultimately, this site was a really great candidate for the use of sustainability practices, not only to improve the course management there, but also to restore the natural function of the creek and the shoreline areas. So just wanted to mention that. And then about a year and a half after that initial site visit, we're able to secure funding to advance this work through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So we were awarded close to $600,000 to complete restoration. And the main goals of this funding were to improve both water quality and ecological conditions along Spicer Creek. So we're very thankful to this program for supporting this project. And that concludes my slide. So I will hand it over to Erica at this point to get into the details of sustainable management strategies.
Hello, everyone. This is Erica speaking, and I am grateful to have worked on the design for this project and to share some more details about it with you today. The things that I will be covering, I'll go into a bit more detail about how we selected the intervention sites along Spicer Creek at River Oaks. And I'll talk about how we identified appropriate strategies to meet the objectives of our specific project, which due to the grant funding focused on certain aspects, but I think a lot of these strategies that were relevant to the metrics of this grant also will apply to improve the condition along similar waterways and other golf courses as well. I'll turn my video off here. Let's see. So similar to what Emily said about just thinking, in context of what sustainability means. When we started this project, we really wanted to look at, how we can improve sustainability on the course, but also specifically to Spicer Creek, how we can kind of treat some of the issues that we identified that may have causes well beyond the site itself. So when we were looking at River Oaks in particular, we looked at, how can we look at this site and what would, sustainability be in this context of a golf course, which may not inherently be the first type of landscape use that you think of doing a restoration project, because sometimes the context of a restorative landscape project, people will, think of dense vegetation, tall vegetation, which just inherently isn't something that, we can do when we have to keep play open for the golf course. So sustainability here, we're really focusing on, how to identify which changes in the creek may be harmful to the creek itself, but also in terms of landscape use on the course. So things like erosion, which can really take land away and can damage the greens and things like that, where you're doing an intervention that is ecologically responsible, but also it's responsible and helpful for the land use itself, in this case, the golf course context. So to just reiterate one of the points about sustainability specific to this presentation, we're speaking about golf courses, but we're not saying that golf courses are inherently the problem, but they're often a place where the landscape and some of these impacts that you can see in this diagram around public view. So it's a really good opportunity for us to kind of talk about golf courses and how they can address some of these problems and be more sustainable without sacrificing some of the traditional goals of a golf course. So the project that I'll be discussing in more detail today focuses on reducing something called non-point source pollution. And really what that is, it's a source of pollution that doesn't have just one point. So it's not something like a discharge pipe where you can really kind of quickly identify that problem. And rather it potentially has multiple sources. And as you can see also in this diagram, multiple things can be happening beyond view. So upstream, you could have development, you could have deforestation or erosion, and all of those could be contributing to something that you're going to end up seeing and ultimately have to address on your site. So in terms of addressing issues on your site that can have causes that aren't even directly located in that property parcel, we really want to emphasize that what we do to start and what others can do to start is look for clues to where those problems might start to, rapidly cause issues with loss of land or damage to the course. So when you're looking for these clues, you can really start to identify points where you see things like eroding banks. So here you'll see a couple images of different types of erosion. The main ones we saw in Spicer Creek were steep areas that don't have enough vegetation to keep the soil together. You'll start to see, they call it calving, so you'll just have big sections of it coming off. Then you'll also see something called slumping, which is when enough water sort of can reach under the lawn. At the edge of ponds, you'll see it a lot of times, and it starts to kind of just eat away at the underlying soil so that eventually it kind of just, a big chunk of it will fall off. And so you can see an image here with slumping shown. You'll also notice clues, like if you look seasonally, this time of year in the spring, you can see lines of leaf litter, which will kind of show you if there is flooding, where the extent of the water would go. If you see low-lying wet areas that have a lot of divots, or if you see exposed root structures like in the upper right image, those are all indications that you may be able to use one of these strategies to improve sustainability on the course. So then after finding some of these clues and maybe identifying areas with erosion or other issues that you'd like to address, the next thing that we do is kind of just take one step out. We zoom out one layer, and in this case, we had drone imaging done so that we could really kind of take, okay, we know where points of erosion are, what might be causing these things, what might we be able to address on site, and at least even if it's also caused by something maybe upstream, we can take steps to prevent negative impacts here on the course. So you'll see in this drone image, we pointed out different things like this area of the course in particular is an irrigation pond, And so you'll notice, you can kind of see the original Spicer Creek channel up there on top is graded out. So the water is now part of this pond area. And because the vast open spaces of a golf course allow, a lot of wind to move around, you'll notice things like deposition of leaf litter, and even just the open water, the wind being allowed to kind of come right across the top of the water contributes to some of that erosion that's happening kind of all around the pond area and the creek banks as well. So getting something like the aerial imaging along with just going on a walk on site to identify areas is very helpful to start to put those pieces together of, how can we target an area or use an intervention to greatest effect. And then zooming out one more time, the next step that we usually take to start a project like this would be to gather more data about the larger landscape features. So here you're seeing a lot of arrows that represent the stormwater runoff patterns, or where the rainfall and snowmelt is all kind of either going freely across the green or maybe hitting a man-made berm of soil and kind of, tracking along that. But ultimately, they're all going to the creek itself. So when you're looking at how can I, identify where water is moving across the site, we got a professional survey, as we do for many of our projects, but particularly larger projects like this. There are resources, and I think Liz shared a link there, where you can kind of get a little bit of information yourself before looking to a professional survey. So Erie County, I know Chautauqua County, a lot of them have GIS mappers, and these websites allow you to kind of turn on and off layers and zoom into your particular area to read some information about topography and about flood zones and things like that, which can also clue you into some of the areas that may need a bit more attention if you're seeing things like erosion. And so just to reiterate, the lines here show where all the water is going, and what we did is we ended up targeting the areas with the highest concentration of runoff and arrows to treat in the project. So in selecting those sites, we wanted to get the biggest bang for our buck and to really make sure that we're implementing these in places where they're going to have both immediate and long-term effects to improve the health of the shoreline of Spicer Creek. So what you're going to see here in the yellow circle and the dashed circles as well is the area of the project that we're highlighting, and we're going to talk a bit more about what we did in each of these different areas. And so the image that you saw previously was the irrigation pond, and I'm going to first go into a little bit more detail about how we addressed the irrigation pond with some of our management and design strategies. So you'll see here, I talked about some of those clues that you'll notice. This is a perfect example, I think, of slumping soil. And so if you have a system where there has been changes to the landscape, so things like a development where a lot of vegetation maybe has been taken out, the water that's flowing across the landscape just has so much kind of less in the way. So it flows a lot faster, and a much greater quantity will flow freely to the water at a very rapid rate. And I think what you'll notice here and on many other creeks is if this happens, these smaller creeks just weren't, they're just not able to handle that amount of water input so quickly. So that really can contribute to erosion. And it's one of the things we see here with the lawn to the edge is just all of that water is going to carry everything, and it's just going to enter the creek immediately. And so that kind of leads to the second image, the after construction, where you see that what we did is we implemented a lot of strategies to really bring back some of that and basically impediments to water flowing freely right to the creek. So we wanted to slow down the water, to capture it, to treat it whenever possible, and to try and do that in ways that wouldn't affect, the look of the golf course, or definitely not the playability. So to kind of just provide a little bit more information on the design strategy here, we what we did is instead of grading back, or instead of taking heavy machinery and kind of trying to soften the slope of that shoreline where it's slumping, we actually filled. So it was more of a large construction project where we brought in kind of a soil material and some heavier stone to create structure out from the shoreline. And what we did is then we planted plants out. So we maintained the existing lawn behind that stone area that you saw. And we really just created a lot of, we call them emergent plants that kind of, they're suitable for times when the water is higher and they're completely submerged, and then they can withstand times when they're not completely submerged as well. So that brought a lot of vegetation back to the shoreline. Some of the plants you see here, there's many different plants that are suitable for different site conditions, but one thing they have in common is that they're all lower growing. And so you'll see here just a quick summary of this area. So this really shows like we've returned some of the vegetation that kind of prevents the runoff from going right into the creek back to this section of shoreline. And these plants are going to have deeper roots that help hold the soil together. If the water rises during flooding events, it will, when it recedes, it will more slowly return back and kind of prevent some of that slumping that you saw before. And so I'm going to move on here. This yellow circled area is our next intervention site, which is located, you can kind of see there called out in the middle, there's a mowed berm that really extends the length of the course between the driving range and one of the holes to the left of it. So all of this water that's coming kind of down off the driving range follows this berm and kind of collects in this step pool area, as we call it. And so we targeted this because it's out of play. So it was a perfect way to do something that's more structural, more permanent, and really can capture a lot of that seasonal runoff quickly and stop it from going into the creek all at the same time. And so you'll see in these images here, before construction of the step pool feature, the water was coming down from the upper course, and you really don't see any standing water, which may seem like a good thing, but actually it was one of the main contributors to some of the erosion that we were seeing in the lower lying area, where you can kind of see people standing in the distance in that upper image. So what we did is we built these step pool features, which show you there how much water there is in the early spring. And then this image here, I wanted to illustrate the point too, that at least with this feature, we knew that it would be more of a seasonal pool. So it's something where we've been asked in the past, well, what do you do about mosquitoes, and how do you prevent those kinds of negative associations that people have with standing water? And fortunately here, and I think if you look at just using a similar feature in other sites, if it's something where you're getting a lot of runoff from snow melt or rain, but more in the spring and fall, not so much in the summer, then similar to this site, you can expect that those will dry up at least through the summer, especially if the plants fill in. You can kind of see the first year there in the lower right image. We have some early growth of the cover crop, or just the grasses that we implement to cover the soil quickly. They're really taking root. And then this last area to the farthest left, this is an area where we also experimented with really, there are two strategies. We're going to kind of go through more of the simple and most cost-effective to kind of the more intensive construction-based strategies. But in this area that's highlighted, we used a little bit of both. So in the smaller circle farthest to the left, we really didn't do any construction at all. We kind of just focused on how to use planting to restabilize the banks in that area. And then the floodplain expansion area, we did a lot of grading to kind of remediate some of the problems associated with erosion, but also of a creek that is kind of separating from its floodplain. So the water doesn't really have a place to go when it erodes to a certain point. So you'll see right here, this is the area where we didn't do much construction at all. We planted, but what we focused on was, you can see the erosion on top is a mixture of seasonal increase of flow in the spring. There's a lot more runoff, I think, than there used to be because there are quite a few developments, residential developments upstream as well. So there's a lot of water entering this system in the spring. And what we focused on was kind of filling, if it was undercut, kind of filling plants into the lower parts of the shoreline. And there's things called live stakes where different species, we used a lot of willow on this project, dogwoods, they will actually be able to sprout from a dormant cutting. So I believe in the winter, the late fall, they can basically cut branches of these certain plants and you can take them and stick them in a new area, and in the spring they actually have the ability to create a new plant from just that stake. So that's a very cost-effective method depending on the context. And you can see after construction in this lower image, we're fortunate to have a really good survival rate on a lot of those live stakes and other plantings that we did. And it's really helping to reduce the erosion that we're seeing in that top image. So this is the area where a little bit downstream where we did do quite a bit of construction. And I was talking about how the floodplain was disengaged or disconnected. So Spicer Creek in general is a relatively small system. So when it's not flooding in the spring, like in the lower image, you can see that's all snow melts, and it's a lot more water than you see in the top image, which is sort of the usual condition when it's not spring or fall if we're getting a lot of rain. But what you'll notice too in the top image is there's a lot of that slumping and erosion because when you do get that heavy quantity of water, it doesn't really have anywhere to go. It's just kind of meeting a really steep point there on the left side. And so it's just carving away at that bank. So to fix that, what we did, you can see in the lower image, we did a lot of grading to just bring the level of the soil to a more softer grade or just a softer slope, so that we would kind of force the water more to the right side. Right now, it really wanted to just kind of eat away at that left bank, and by bringing the level of the floodplain down on the right, the creek is kind of using that and it's kind of pushing the extra water off to the side. And what's nice about this is the playability of the course, it goes over Spicer Creek here from left to right. So this area was lower lying and wasn't really in play, which allowed us to, especially in the early spring, to push some of this water over there, even though for a bit of time it is a little bit wetter. And so this is another image showing that same area after planting. And you'll notice that once the plants start filling in and that spring water, the spring flood water kind of recedes, now the creek is meandering more comfortably and you're not seeing the eating away of that left bank. So we're really seeing a lot more stability in this section of shoreline. And that still leaves them room to seasonally mow. So these are lower growing grasses that can be maintained, and you can still comfortably play over this section of the creek. So to just kind of recap what we did in this upper section, we really focused on an infill of plants, of native plants that were often lower growing and would quickly establish more structure in the soil. And so this is something that you can really look at your own sites, and if there is a land-water interface, there's a good chance that there are a wide variety of plants that could help restabilize that slope. And it's just a matter of then selecting that one that's going to also serve you in terms of, do you want a view shed there? Or do you need to play over it? Or do you need to access something for maintenance? So really it's just trying to select that right plant for the right place. So here is a little bit of a larger recap of strategies that we use. These are just images, precedent images or images from other courses too that kind of highlight some of these strategies being used in different areas around the US. So on the left side, we have simpler strategies that may be more cost effective, and then farthest right are some of the more intensive applications. So the first one here we have is just thinking about ways to alter course management. Another part of this project and something that River Oaks was already implementing to great effect is looking at more of a terraced mowing strategy. So in addition to having the greens, there are, areas that may be more out of play that or closer to waterways that you can leave as a buffer zone and really maybe only mow once a year. Or if you have the next one here, the opportunity to sort of strategically naturalize or give some kind of portion of the site back to something like forest, then you can actually either plant trees in that area or sort of let it go through succession back to a forested zone. And sometimes that can be something that you look at from a design perspective and say you want an area to be framed, or you want more of an inviting view on one of the holes of the course. You can look at, okay, maybe this can serve those goals as well if you're thinking about returning something to a wetland or a forested condition. And then here, the transition here from strategic naturalization is really when you get into buying products and doing more construction. So there are sustainability products that can be used along waterways, and also basically slope restoration could be within this as well, even if it's not next to a creek like Spicer. And those would be things like, you'll see in the image there, he's holding what they call coir matting, or it's a biodegradable fabric that's used to cover all that exposed soil. And usually that's used in conjunction with seeding. So you put down grass seed or native seed for something like meadow establishment, which will grow through that. And then you won't see it anymore after the plant's established, and then the matting will start to break down. So that's a good tool if you're doing more simple construction work, but you want to sort of use a mix of materials that are going to sort of fade away as the natural materials take over. The other thing you'll see in this image is it looks like a log, and it's called, there's probably different names for it, but we call them coir logs. So it's a similar biodegradable fabric, and it's usually filled with a biodegradable material as well. And those can be staked under, so if you have those slumping banks, those can be actually staked under them to kind of provide some temporary reinforcement while the larger plants, maybe like shrubs or live stakes and seed, take over. So that's another good one that we did use on that last section as well. We kind of staked some of those in, and really within 2 years, it's hard to see any of those materials. And then here, the last one we have, and we'll talk about some more resources if you're thinking of a larger project like this one was, where landscape construction is a great way, while more costly, to make permanent changes and create things like those step pools, or reconnect a floodplain, or look at maybe regrading some of the other features on the course. So these are just a few images from the first couple of years of establishment here. This is still a pretty young project, but it's been exciting because every year, the plants are really showing that they're taking hold and really proving to be helpful in starting to reverse a lot of that erosion that you would see in those early images when we first looked at the site. And so that's a really great thing to see so quickly. And I think it speaks to the fact that, we tried to do that targeted approach and really do our best to listen to the course's needs as well. And so hopefully, we think it's going great, and hopefully the course likes as well. And that's why we're really happy to have Rick here today to speak to more of the day-to-day experience of using this, and what the course members think. So from here, we're going to transition to a question portion where we'll bring back in Emily and for the first portion of the presentation if you have questions, and then I'm happy to answer anything about the design. And Rick is here as well to talk about any of the questions you might have about managing this kind of a project.
All right, if anyone has any questions, you should be able to unmute yourselves, or feel free to use the chat function if that's more comfortable for yourselves. We do have another chance for question and answers later on, so no worries. Okay, looks like we have a question. Do you have any resources in particular for the native plantings you decided to use for this project?
I guess, Emily, feel free to jump in here too. So Waterkeeper has done a native planting guide, which kind of just introduces the idea of some of the native plants. On this project in particular, we'll send out the presentation. There are some references to the plants we used in some areas on the one slide, and I'd be happy to provide and follow up some, there's actually great resources from places like the Cornell Cooperative Extension. I think they talk in some of their resources about just some native shrubs and trees and the conditions that they prefer. So that's one thing about this, is we can share some of the plants that we use, but they may or may not work in other contexts as well. So I think the best thing to do is we can definitely provide some of the general resources that we reference that just kind of intro the topic. And then if there are specific questions about certain plants, or, you know, if you decide, which would be really happy if you do, to do a project similar to this, we can either connect you with the right people or offer more detailed information on specific plants.
Okay, thanks, Erica. All right, anybody else with a question? Feel free to pop in.
Hi, my name is Joellen Lampman, and I actually was a director of the Audubon Cooperative Sanctuary Program for golf courses from the 80s through the mid-2010s. And one of the things that I noticed from that period of time was that when people tried to do these naturalization programs, the impact of invasive species just grew exponentially over that period of time. So I know this is a young project, but have you had any issues with invasive species that you've dealt with, or do you have plans for dealing with them going into the future?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's definitely something that has to be a major consideration, not only upfront in the planning portion, because those original site walks, they always, you know, we always find things like Phragmites or Japanese knotweed, which are some of the big ones that are really aggressive and require a lot to not just immediately take over the plants that you just put in. So it's definitely something that we had to consider. It's definitely something that was on the site. And we were fortunate in this project to be working with landowners, and Rick, you can jump in too, that actually have the ability to be certified to treat some of those invasives like Phragmites for us as the project establishes. So they can kind of, like, as those native plants really gain strength, they can, you know, help make sure the balance is in the favor of the plants that we want there. And I think that's really also one of those things that, you know, looking at which projects we feel are worth doing or maybe have the best outcomes, we're weighing the factors like, is the landowner, you know, able to, or, you know, willing to kind of do some of that maintenance that helps it succeed long term. And then we also supplement in our projects, we use companies that specialize in invasive species management, because we don't advocate for kind of just, you know, broadcast spraying or something. If we do use it, we want it to be very strategic. So we want people, if we're treating Phragmites, to be certified to do it in a way that won't harm anything else. And we will incorporate smaller contracts for seasonal treatment if we have a really aggressive stand of something like Phragmites. So yeah, we definitely have to consider that. And I think it's probably something that everyone would have to think about. And there are companies that that do specialize in helping you with those problems.
Great, thank you.
All right, I think we can move on, and we do have another chance for questions if people have any others. All right, so we're just going to get our share screen pulled up for the remaining section of our presentation. Should pop up in just a minute.
Is it working?
Yep, just share so that it's full screen. All set.
Liz, I just want to confirm that everyone can see the actual slides.
Yep, it looks good on my end.
Okay, great. Hi everyone, my name is Sarah. I'm the Ecological Program Manager at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, and I'm going to be going over some of the restoration references and resources that are available. None of these are necessarily through Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, and it's not all of the resources available, but they're just a couple that we pulled. And another thing to keep in mind is that if you're considering implementing any type of best management practice, it is best that you look into any sort of permitting that you might need. And if you have any questions about this, you're more than welcome to reach out to us. We're happy to point you in the right direction if you're not sure where to get started with that. So this section is going to go over a couple of best management guides that are available, a couple of green infrastructure and water quality resource grants, also grants that are available for restoration, best management practices, overall land conservation, for some larger scale conservation projects, and then those that are golf course specific. So this first slide here goes over some of the guides that are available to help you understand what sort of best management practices are available or commonly implemented on golf courses. So this first one here, Best Management Practices for New York State Golf Courses, 2nd edition. This is a really great one that was done by Cornell University along with the GCSAA. I believe it was updated within the past year. So this one can kind of help you go by type of best management practice that you're looking at and give you more detail on what they entail. This second blue title here, New York Golf Course Foundation. This one is a website version where you can kind of walk through what issues you're having, and it takes you along step by step into what the best management practice for that situation might be. There's also some through USGA case studies. And then if you're a member of the GCSAA, they have their environment hub as well. So Erica went over a couple of best management practices that we implemented at the golf course and gave examples of what those are. But a lot of the time they range from simpler solutions to more complicated ones that require some more planning and resources. So this slide looks a little bit more at some of the green infrastructure and water quality resources that might help you do some of the easier to implement projects. These could extend from low-mow zones to revegetation to some of the matting and live staking that you saw on the projects or on the images that Erica had shown. So there's the DEC Buffer in a Bag program that provides trees for private properties. The Arbor Day Foundation has funding that pays for saplings. The New York Sea Grant also offers a couple of ecosystem-based management resources. And then the Lake Erie Watershed Protection Alliance, which is definitely a little more located within the Lake Erie watershed, but they offer some great resources as well. As far as land conservation, there's the, is my land conservation slide up? Liz?
It's the restoration resources, best management practices slide.
Okay, weird. Okay, then as far as restoration resources for best management practices, this one covers some of the slightly more complicated best management practices. There's a couple outlined here there through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and then some through the North American Wetlands Conservation Act. All of these, you can click on the links to learn more about what sort of projects they covered, and we provide a quick overview here. So if there's an issue that you're having or a conservation practice that you're trying to introduce to your course, you can click on these to learn more detail. Okay, there's the land conservation slide. So some of the resources here, we have the U.S. Endowment for Forests and Communities. One of the things to think about as you look at different grants is that they are based on funding that's available. So a lot of these were available in previous years, but they might not be available this year or next year, depending on how things work out funding-wise. And they usually have a specific period when you're able to apply when the request for application goes out. So these are all things you want to keep in mind. It's definitely hard to pull something together last minute. So you might want to look into these ahead of time. Another thing to consider too is even though resources might not be available for private entities, it is possible to apply for a grant with your municipality, for example. So if you look into a grant and you have some questions, they usually have a section where you can reach out to those administering the grant. But if you have any questions that you need some help with, you can feel free to reach out to us as well. This last slide is on some of the larger restoration project resources. So these can sometimes cover more of the more complicated best management practices, whether it be the shoreline regrading or step pulls. But a lot of these, they are water quality related. So similar to the project that we did, you'll want to think of how they're connected to the water resources. One of the funding areas that's available for golf courses is through the GCSAA. It is necessary that you're a member to be able to access their materials or to apply for this grant. But as a lot of golf courses are, it's something that you might want to keep in mind. And then there are also certifications available as golf courses have younger members that come up, or some of their more traditional members that are interested in ecosystems or birding, habitat for animals. Golf courses can all double in this way. So one of the resources that exists is the Audubon Cooperative Sanctuary Program. And this is a really great resource to have your course have a formal certification that people can turn to, be proud of. And I just wanted to emphasize again that Cornell has a really great program. They're working on some turf management for golf courses, and they're working with the New York State Pollution Prevention Institute as well on partnering with golf courses to address some things like water usage. So they're definitely a resource as well that you should consider looking into if you're thinking about implementing best management practices on your course.
All right, thank you, Sarah. So that completes our presentation. I would like to thank everyone for attending. The recording and slides that will have clickable links will be sent out to all registrants within a few days. And if anyone has, questions or would like to have a more thorough conversation with Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper or a contact at River Oaks, our contact information is here on this slide. Yep, so just leave that up, Sarah, for a minute in case anybody wants to put down contact info.
Okay.
And we do have some time for questions for anyone at Waterkeeper, or if you have any questions for Rick, the golf course supervisor, on his perspective. Feel free to either chat or unmute and jump in.
I would love to hear how the golfers has responded to this project.
All right, yeah. So Rick, would you like to chime in?
Yep, absolutely. We had, 350 members this year, and it seems like every member had multiple questions about the project over and over and over. Not one of them seemed distracted by the project at all. It was very fluent. It happened mainly, during the fall and winter months, so it didn't affect play too much. The growing period was pretty speedy. And then we even posted signs, really nice signs on course to add a little extra information for the golfer, for the person walking through. And it was really detailed. And I think the membership really liked it, appreciated it, and they saw the improvements immediately. So it was a really good benefit for the golf course and the golfer in all. So, for me, my perspective, it was a great addition to the golf course and for the membership as well.
Thanks, Rick. All right, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to chime in or add to the chat. All right. Otherwise, our contact info is here, and the email with the Zoom link came from Sarah, so you should already have her email address in your email account. But we'll be sending out the slides and the recording in a few days. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us on your Wednesday afternoon. We hope you learned a lot, and we are excited to keep seeing this project continue and watch it grow, and hope to get more courses involved in similar types of restoration and sustainable management. So we're gonna end our meeting. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we're here if you need any information or additional resources. All right, take care, everybody.